Eurasia, the world's largest landmass. Some 10,000 kilometers from the Pacific to the Atlantic Oceans. A formidable distance even in today's world. And yet over that vast distance, human beings have pursued one of history's greatest enterprises, the Silk Road. A tremendously profitable trade route, and so much more. For thousands of years, exotic goods, new technologies, conquering armies, and brilliant ideas traveled along the Silk Road. Silk Road trade helped to build empires and to break them. It fanned the fires of revolution, drove great explorations, and forged powerful bonds between faraway peoples.
The Silk Road made human beings realize that there are other people out there, and it opened the eyes of the East and the West.
This is the story of how Silk Road trade made so much more than money. It's the epic tale of how the Silk Road helped create a world that created us. At the Battle of Crécy in 1346, the English won an historic victory over France. Helped by a Chinese invention that had traveled to Europe. Gunpowder. And in the same year of 1346, some 2,000 kilometers east of Crécy, another battle was taking place on the shores of the Black Sea. A Mongol army had been laying siege to the Crimean port city of Kaffa, a Silk Road trading post belonging to the Italian city of Genoa. The Mongols were masters of siege warfare. But Kaffa was still holding out after more than 2 years. Suddenly, the Mongol army was decimated. Not by Kaffa's defenders, but by an unknown disease. The Mongols quickly ended their siege. But before they left Kaffa, they loaded their siege engines with the corpses of their dead and flung them over the city's walls, believing that the stench of death would kill the defenders. Medieval chronicles say that Kaffa's defenders did die by the thousands, but not from the smell of death. One year later, in 1347, the same disease that had killed the Mongols at Kaffa was killing people in Constantinople. By 1348, it was killing people across Western Europe. By 1350, it was killing people as far away as Greenland. And terrified Europeans had given it a name: the Black Death. In just under a decade, from 1347 to 1356, the Black Death killed at least 25 million Europeans, 1/3 of Europe's population. Today, most scholars believe that the Black Death was an outbreak of bubonic plague that was transmitted to humans by infected fleas living on rats. And we believe that it spread across Eurasia by hitching a ride with armies, ships, and caravans along trade routes that were already ancient by the time of the Black Death. Microorganic travelers of all kinds have moved across Eurasia for thousands of years. A biomigration that has had as big an impact on history as the more famous exchanges of new technologies and luxury goods. And as a recent discovery shows, tiny living things moving along the Silk Road brought life as well as death.
We were putting together some new methods of looking for early agriculture, and for that we needed to do a survey of all the finds of early crops in Europe. When you looked at a map of all of Europe, then you could see there were these Chinese crops in small numbers very early on in Europe.
Very early on was around 2000 BCE, when a Chinese grain called broomcorn millet appears in the Eastern European archaeological record.
The actual crop itself will decay or be eaten, but rather fortunately, if it's cooked and overburnt, it turns to carbon. That will stay in the archaeological record for a long time.
In the Chinese province of Inner Mongolia, archaeologists are studying the origins of broomcorn millet, one of the world's oldest domestic crops.
我们现在看到的是近100亩的糜子田，这个糜子在这个地方种植呢，有近8000年的历史，是世界范围内人工种植糜子最早的地区。那么糜子从这个地方起源之后，由东向西传入欧洲。那么这也是我们东方人、东方文明对西方文明的重要贡献。
But it isn't clear just how and why broomcorn millet traveled thousands of kilometers across Eurasia, through some of the world's harshest environments, all the way to Europe. Millet's long journey may have begun simply because it traveled so well.
Millets are essentially cereals, but are very small. And because they have very small grains, they're hardy and they're tough, and they can grow quite fast. Broomcorn millet, at a push, can get from seed to seed in 45 days. You can plant a seed in the ground, and 45 days later, in the right conditions, you may have plants. That's incredibly fast. So if you're moving around part of Asia, where on the one hand there's a long winter, a short growing season, and you can't particularly rely on rainfall, then something that gets a move on in terms of its growth cycle is very valuable. There are accounts of communities that are on horseback for quite a lot of the time and herding animals and so forth. But for that short season of the year that millet grows in, they can actually sow the millet on horseback, trample it in with the horse's feet, and then either leave a few teenagers there to scare the birds off for a couple of months, come back 2 months later and harvest the crops.
Millet was a highly mobile grain, but there wasn't any evidence of how it might have traveled from its home in northern China. Until archaeologists found signs of millet cultivation around 2500 BCE in the foothills of the Tian Shan Mountains in Central Asia.
At that point, we asked ourselves, well, what is it about these foothills? Why the foothills? Clearly, it's about water. If one travels across the center of Asia, one realizes why water is a key. And wherever you are in Asia, it can be very dry, of course, but if one goes uphill to those foothills, then one has somewhere where there will be streams running off the mountains and water.
Archaeologists found that around 1000 BCE, millet farmers left the Tianshan foothills and their reliable water supply and began moving into much harsher environments.
We can see, if you like, the confidence of farmers spreading out from where the water is really safe to areas where you have to know more about the water and the landscape and the geography, both into the steppe to the north and to the desert to the south.
Millet's local migrations may have linked it with the world. Migrating millet farmers in search of water may have settled near trade routes. And long-distance travelers would have chosen routes near reliable sources of food and water.
I think very much those traders are definitely working through networks that are already centuries old. It's at least a millennium before you see something crystallizing that you can start calling the Silk Road.
Another discovery has revealed that this ancient grain migration wasn't only from east to west.
小麦是由西向东传入中国的，被我们接受，并成为我们的主要的食粮，体现出东西文化交流的这种互动关系。那么这条欧亚草原早期东西方文化交流之路，应该是说是丝绸之路的前身。那么其中体现出了这种民族的迁徙、融合，甚至商贸流通。
Trading millet and wheat between China and Europe may have done much more than feed people. It may also have enabled profound social change.
Seeds germinate at one time of year and are harvested another time of year. And that's kind of hardwired into their biology. And so farming is a one-season activity, and there are other things going on at other times of year. And during the second millennium BC, a number of societies are doing something which is quite radically different, and that is putting more than one season in a single year. Crops like millet are really useful for that, in that if you are a Western farmer with wheat and barley fields reaching maturity during the summer, and you think, right, with the same plot of land, I want to increase production. And so I want another crop after I've harvested the first crop. You can't do a long season, large grain crop like wheat and barley again. So something that's short and sharp, like millet, you can tag onto the end of it and catch another season before the winters set in. Interestingly, when you get to China, it's the converse. You have this short season crop already there, and by rearranging your life, you can bring a long season crop such as wheat and barley in at that stage. So the implications are, with the same plot of land, you could basically get two harvests rather than one. So two sets of calories rather than one. It may release some of the community to not farm at all and occupy roles within cities or as craftspeople or leaders. If we look at the second millennium BC, what we certainly see is at the same time as multi-cropping is there, then there are a lot of the community are not farmers, but instead metal workers or kings or priests or something else. And so what we see evidence of is multi-cropping allows a non-farming sector within the community. So what we have is a small, not very impressive looking seed, but because of the way it grows and because of its biology, it has a massive impact in changing the productivity of the heartlands of Western farming. So those Western farmlands could, in the same area, produce 2 crops rather than 1, and that enabled a whole series of things that we associate with the word civilization.
Finding Chinese millet in Europe and European wheat and barley in China suggests that long before the Silk Road, East and West were introducing one another to new foods, and that the movement of crops may have helped create the earliest East-West trade routes. And in the deserts of far western China, archaeologists have discovered another way living organisms could travel the Silk Road. This is Shanshanji Relay Station, an archaeological site near the town of Danhuang, a major stopping point on the Silk Road. 2,000 years ago, during the Han Dynasty, Shanshanji was a very busy and very cosmopolitan place.
看见旋转制出土的这个简牍，发现它这个旋转制来回接不仅是要有邮寄的这个传播的，而接的是商旅和这个政府接待这个政府官员的一个说法。它你看汉简里边有接待的主要的官员，你像有我们现西域的电王啊、吴松王、康熙王，他最多的时候国王，他最多的时候要1060多人。 所以他经过这个地方的人员也是来往往，是非常杂的。
It would be used for merchants, and it would also be used for government business. People could travel long distances knowing that there was somewhere they could stay and be refreshed and recover, change their horses, and then move on to the next relay station. The wonderful thing about the Shanshanji trading post was that it's in a part of the country that is not built up now, and the environment, being very dry and often very cold in the winter, means that things are preserved there very well. So a lot of the things within inside that trading post have survived instead of decomposing.
Excavators were especially excited to find something that perhaps only an archaeologist could love. The 2,000-year-old equivalent of toilet paper.
In China, they wrote back in Han Dynasty times how they would have a stick with cloth wrapped on the end that people would wipe themselves with. And there were quite a few of these sticks thrown into the latrine as if people discarded them in there when they'd finished. These sticks have been found at some other excavations in China as well. But what's great about this particular relay station is we still had the cloth wrapped on the end and we still had the human feces on. So we scraped off the dried feces from the cloth and took them to the lab. We found 4 different species of parasite in those who use this latrine. 2 of the species are spread by feces contaminating your food or your hands or your drink, so roundworm and whipworm. Another species was a kind of tapeworm that they probably acquired by eating raw or undercooked pork. And then we found the really exciting find, which was the Chinese liver fluke. This is a small flatworm that lives in eastern and southern China and in Korea. It can only survive in marshy, wet places. But here we found it 1,500 kilometers away from anywhere that has it in modern times. So it wasn't what we expected to find. It was brilliant that we could find it on the Silk Road. The liver fluke requires a life cycle where it passes through freshwater snails and through small fish and then bigger fish. And if you cook the fish, then you don't get the liver fluke. But if you eat the fish raw, then it hatches out in your stomach, migrates through your body, crawls into the liver, and then develops there. There was no way that people in the area of this relay station could have caught it in that particular area because it was far too dry. There were no lakes, there were no freshwater snails and fish for them to infect.
特别是肝吸血虫的这种发现，是个重要的一个发现。它说明这个是南方的这个商旅或者是公务人员，经过数千公里到达泉泉至以后，把这个粪便这个带到。经过DNA的分析以后，我们再和欧洲这些相同病原进行一个对比，把它得出一个是不是真正是从我们国家的这个东部沿海的这种肝吸血虫病传播到欧洲去的，或者是欧洲的一些肝血病传播到我国的，它们之间是不是相互传播的？我们在做这进一步的研究。
The finds at Zhongshanji have shown that humans could carry diseases long distances along the Silk Road. Another discovery has revealed what could happen when they did. In 2009, German scientists began investigating a puzzling discovery in the Bavarian town of Aschheim.
Ungefähr 20 Jahren hat man in Aschheim dieses Gräberfeld gefunden, was mehr als 400 Individuen umfasst hat. Man konnte das datieren auf eine Zeit ungefähr vom 5. Jahrhundert bis ins 7. Jahrhundert. Und was eben ganz spannend war für uns eigentlich, dass wir da viele Gräber hatten, die mehr als eine Person enthielten. Also ungefähr 20 Gräber, die 2 bis sogar 5 Personen in einem Grab bestattet hatten. Aschheim sah eigentlich aus wie jeder Friedhof, den wir hier erwarten würden, bis eben auf diese Mehrfachbestattung, also diese Menschen, die in einem Grab zusammen bestattet waren. Und das hat uns eben neugierig gemacht. Und wir haben uns gefragt, warum sind ausgerechnet die in diesem einen Grab zusammen?
The Aschheim mass burial was an archaeological enigma, but there was one crucial clue. The bodies had been buried during the 6th century CE. In the 6th century, a terrifying illness called the Plague of Justinian ravaged the Eastern Roman Empire. It killed 30 to 50 million people in Europe, Asia, and Africa. Nearly half of all the people on Earth.
Wo uns dann Geschichtsschreiber erzählen, dass 1000 Menschen auf der Straße lagen, dass auf dem Höhepunkt der Seuche Zehntausende starben, so viele, dass sie gar nicht mehr begraben werden konnten, sondern dass so Wachtürme genutzt worden sind, wo sie die Leichen reingeschmissen haben und das dann einfach zugemauert haben, weil sie eben nicht mehr wussten, was man damit machen soll. Also durchaus vergleichbar wie mit dem Schwarzen Tod ungefähr. Also wir haben uns dann eben gefragt mit diesen Mehrfachbestattungen, was es damit auf sich hat und haben uns die ausgesucht, um die auf diesen Pesterreger zu screenen.
The Justinian plague arrived in Constantinople on ships from Egypt. But what the disease was and where it came from remained unknown. The team investigating Aschheim's mass burial hoped its bones might reveal the answer.
Wir haben mehr als 20 Individuen darauf untersucht mit DNA-Analysen und haben bei 4 Individuen kleine Fragmente der DNA gefunden. Allerdings nur bei dieser einen Dame hier, also bei einer jungen Dame, genug DNA, um diese wirklich gut analysieren zu können. Und das ist eben dieses Individuum. Zum Beispiel über diese Frau. Die Frau hat hier noch recht offene Schädelnähte. Daran können wir sehen, dass sie recht jung verstorben ist. Wir würden das Individuum jetzt auf Anfang 20 schätzen ungefähr. Und dann in einem nächsten Schritt würden wir eben weiterführende Analysen machen, wie in diesem Fall eben schauen, ob wir diesen Pesterreger finden. Und dafür benutzen wir am liebsten Zähne. Und zwar am liebsten auch solche Zähne hier, also Zähne mit viel Wurzel dran, weil da die DNA drin steckt. Und weil so ein Zahn in so einem Kiefer ist er da gut beschützt und hier hält sich eben die DNA am allerbesten. Und dann würden wir damit mit diesem Zahn ins Labor gehen und mit chemischen Prozessen versuchen, die DNA da rauszuholen. Und als wir uns dann die DNA angeschaut haben aus diesem Individuum, haben wir festgestellt, dass wir tatsächlich Yersinia pestis, also den Erreger der Pest des Schwarzen Todes, später gefunden haben. Was wir aber auch feststellen konnten, ist, dass dieser Erreger nicht in Europa entstanden ist, sondern eben in Asien evolviert ist.
Studies like the Ashheim DNA Project have concluded that 800 years before the Black Death, plague traveled the Silk Road, and that centuries later, the Black Death followed in its path. Most scholars now agree that the Black Death originated in Central Asia, and that it first reached Europe on Italian merchant ships returning from the East. The Black Death killed with incredible speed. Victims had only a week to a few hours to live. Entire towns and monasteries were wiped out, and no one knew what to do.
It may have spread about 5 miles a day, which is a lot faster than a lot of modern bubonic plague outbreaks. Whether it was because of the rate at which people fled from it that spread it faster than it might otherwise have been. And it certainly was something that had a dramatic effect on people in Europe. They all wrote about it, they were all scared of it. So they had some concept of contagion and the idea that the disease could be spread from one person to another, but they didn't know how. They had no idea about bacteria or the spread of microorganisms at that stage. So they hadn't worked out how disease was spread, but they just realized that one person seemed to be able to spread it to the rest of their family, so they realized something must be happening there.
Baffled physicians consulted the works of ancient authorities like Hippocrates, who lived 4 centuries before the birth of Jesus, and Galen, who lived 2 centuries after Jesus' death. Hippocrates and Galen believed that illness was a result of an imbalance among 4 so-called humours: blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile.
The theory was that if you had your 4 humours in balance, your blood, your phlegm, your black bile, and your yellow bile, then you'd be healthy. But if they came out of balance, or if you had corruption of one of your humours, then that would make you unwell. So the treatments the doctors used were largely based on their understanding of humoral theory. So at the beginning, they tried the normal treatments of dietary modification and bloodletting and baths and so on, but they had no effect. They believed that bad vapors were coming up from the ground, making people ill, affecting their humours. They believed that a strong southerly wind was a bad thing that made a lot of people ill. That it was a combination of the alignments of the planets, because they believed in astrology and its effect on your risk of disease. They really didn't have a structured medical approach to how to deal with it. It took everyone off guard. No one knew how to deal with it. The doctors were effectively powerless.
Some citizens attempted another cure. Jews in Europe suffered fewer deaths from plague. That may have been because they were socially isolated and practiced better hygiene than the general population. But surviving the Black Death cost thousands of European Jews their lives. All across plague-stricken Europe, the already age-old Christian prejudice against Jews exploded into murderous hatred.
They believe that people with leprosy or Jewish people may have actually exacerbated the plague by poisoning people. So this is a sign of how panicked and how worried everybody was, that they were thinking of really quite bizarre kind of interpretations as to why everyone was coming sick.
While mobs murdered Jews, physicians tried to stop the Black Death. When traditional theories of disease failed, they resorted to studying the disease itself. They were desperate to understand what was causing the Black Death, how it spread, and how to treat it. Slowly, they found answers.
They tried various treatments, but no medicines had any effect. But that's why they moved over time to trying to restrict the contact of people, burning the clothes of people that had died rather than giving them to other people. And they realized that the clothes and spread of people was an important way they could stop the spread of disease. So we have the introduction of concept of quarantine, where people weren't allowed to move from one area to another if there was a plague outbreak. And also that when sailors and ships arrived in a port, they may have to stay in a quarantined area for a certain number of days until they were found to be clear of the disease, and then they could move inland and actually go into town.
Over time, this new trial and error approach would spawn a medical revolution. Some 200 years after the Black Death, the brilliant physician Andreas Vesalius published meticulous studies of the human body that exploded ancient and medieval theories and gave birth to modern anatomy. Europe's battle against the Black Death taught lessons that helped create modern medicine. And even centuries later, the Black Death still has much to teach.
So this is the skull of a man who survived the Black Death and died in Cambridge in the later part of the 1300s. We know he survived the Black Death because we have a radiocarbon date that's shown when he died, and we know he was a fairly old individual. One of the things we're doing here is a project looking at the effect of the bubonic plague upon the British population, specifically in Cambridge. And what we're trying to find out is what are different about people who survived compared with people who died. And that way we can work out how the Black Death really changed the population of Britain and what our population might have been like had half of us not died in the mid-1300s. And to do that, we're looking at the genetics, the height, the health, and many other aspects of the skeletons that we find who died before the Black Death and the ones who died afterwards, so we can see the effect of this epidemic upon people in Britain. So what we're hoping to find out is what is different about the genes of the people that survived. Did they somehow have a better resistance to bubonic plague than other people, or was it just mere chance as to who survived and who died?
Those who did survive led better lives, as the greatest horror of their age gave way to a new era. The Black Death had decimated Europe's workforce. Desperate for labor, the nobility had to compete for surviving workers by offering higher wages.
Over the next few centuries, we see a complete rebalancing in the population. So the poor, hungry farmers who didn't have enough land were suddenly in a different position. The farmers around them had died. Their income could go up because they could farm much more land. And so there was less poverty and famine among the farmers.
Opportunities increased due to the shortage of workers. Women could now be scribes and hold other jobs formerly reserved for men. The European middle class was born.
The fact that we then had fewer people able to do manual labor means that not only did the price of their labor go up, so they then had better income, it also means that there seems to have been a number of inventions made specifically for labor-saving devices. We find the introduction of the spinning wheel, we find horizontal looms, we find filling mills, we've had blast furnaces, mechanized tools, and we have three-masted ships that could hold a lot more cargo for only a small number more sailors. So it's a much more efficient way of trade. So over the next 200 years or so, we see big improvements in mechanization, and the fact that fewer people around meant that these things may have been invented because of the shortage of people following the Black Death.
Newly affluent Europeans created a bigger market for exotic imported goods. Especially for one faraway luxury, traded since ancient times along the Silk Road: spices. In the late Middle Ages, Asian spices like pepper, cinnamon, and cloves were highly valuable commodities. In London, dock workers' bonuses were paid with Indonesian cloves. In Venice, people bought houses with pepper. Anyone brave enough to seek out spices could get very, very rich. And trading in spices meant traveling the trade routes between East and West. Venetian merchants traveled those routes and dominated the spice trade. Europe had to pay whatever Venice demanded. Venice became a fabulously wealthy city, while the rest of Europe grumbled and paid. Meanwhile, China was also making epic voyages to the spice lands and developing some of the world's most advanced maritime technology. During the 13th and 14th centuries, foreign visitors to China were awed by the size and sophistication of Chinese vessels. In the year 1345, The Moroccan traveler Ibn Battuta wrote of seeing massive ships that could carry 1,000 men, the only ships big enough to make the long journey from China to India. And Marco Polo told of sailing on a Chinese spice trading vessel in the year 1292 CE. The experience deeply impressed him. He claimed the Chinese ship he sailed on was capable of holding 5,000 to 6,000 baskets of pepper, a much bigger cargo than the spice ships of his native Venice could hold. And that his vessel was escorted by smaller ships that could carry 1,000 pepper baskets. Polo embarked on his journey from the Chinese port of Quanzhou, a place he described as teeming with hundreds of vessels from China and from distant lands. But he didn't report his vessel's exact dimensions, leaving historians to wonder if he'd exaggerated the ship's size, or even if he had actually sailed on it. And then, in 1973, Chinese archaeologists found a shipwreck in Quanzhou harbor.
载重量呢是有200吨，排水量有400吨。那这一艘沉船呢，根据这个随船的一个出土物的情况来看呢，是出土了很多的香料，总共有2000多公斤的一个香料。然后另外的还有一些这个象棋子啊，另外的还有一些外国的一个物产。那么通过这一个船的船载的这个物品来判断，这一艘船呢应该是从东南亚这些地方返航。
The Quanzhou ship was carrying rare woods from Java and Cambodia, frankincense from Arabia, even ambergris from Somalia. It sank in the year 1277, just 15 years before Marco Polo visited Quanzhou. And its design and construction were remarkably advanced for their time, featuring watertight compartments and other innovations centuries before Western vessels had them.
那么很可能它这个船体它就会破了之后呢，如果有这个水密隔舱以及这个船底下面的一个流水孔，那么它的优势就体现出来了。像如果它只是说碰到一个小的一个船身的一个破口之后呢进水，那么如果把两端的这个流水孔给它堵住之后呢，那水只是在一个舱位进水，那么它船员可以把这个货物呢及时搬到另外的船舱，然后呢对这个舱位进行这个破损的地方及时修补。 另外呢，这艘船呢，我们在这个船的尾部呢有一个舵孔。那么这个呢，古代在这个宋代的时候呢，当时它的造船呢也已经发明了一个升降舵。那么它这个升降舵呢，就是说它可以提高这个船只的这个方向的这个摆动，以及它的一个舵效，它的方向感。那么这个呢是在像外国的船只呢，它差不多是要过了几百年后才学习到这个技术的一个知识。
35 meters long and 10 meters wide, the Quanzhou ship could have been one of the smaller vessels that escorted Marco Polo's bigger ship. And there's also evidence that very large Chinese trading vessels did exist. This park in the Chinese city of Nanjing is built on the remains of a shipyard dating from the 14th century. When they excavated that shipyard, archaeologists found 2 giant rudder posts, each of them over 10 meters long. Chinese records speak of giant treasure ships carrying trade goods on epic journeys to faraway lands. commanded by the distinguished admiral Zheng He, a Chinese armada called the Great Fleet made 7 voyages between the years 1405 and 1433. From Lujiagong in China's Jiangsu province, the fleet sailed on diplomatic missions to Southeast Asia, the great Indian seaport of Calicut, Arabia, and along Africa's east coast, forging relationships that linked seaborne and overland trade. Over 300 ships carrying nearly 30,000 men sailed on the first of those expeditions. Chronicles of those voyages claim that the largest of Zheng He's ships were over 130 meters long and over 50 meters wide. But marine engineers doubt ships that big would have been seaworthy. The American clipper ship Great Republic, launched in 1853, was 102 meters long and 16 meters wide. In 1872, her leaking hull sank her in a hurricane. The Wyoming, built in 1909, was 110 meters long. Its extreme length made it structurally unstable in heavy seas. In 1924, the Wyoming sank during a storm. If Zheng He's treasure ships were as big as Chinese chronicles claim, they would have been as long and wide as the Wyoming and longer than the Great Republic.
那么很多通过这个，像我们在访问一些造船师的时候呢，他们是觉得这个船只的这个体量是超出了这个我们现在所能够制造出来的这样一个船只的一个载体出来，所以呢还有待于这个考古发掘以及更多的一个资料来印证这样的郑和船队文献当中的一个记载是否是真实的。
Whatever the size of its ships, the Great Fleet deeply impressed maritime trading nations from Indochina to Africa. China seemed poised to dominate the coveted spice trade. But in 1433, Admiral Zheng He died. About the same time, the Chinese court began losing interest in long-distance voyaging, and Chinese seafaring entered a long decline. Scarcely more than 100 years after the Great Fleet's last voyage, the emperor declared overseas voyaging a crime. And it wasn't long before East-West trade suffered another blow. By the middle of the 15th century, the once mighty Byzantine Empire was in deep decline. The Ottoman Turks, descendants of Central Asian nomads, had conquered most of its territory. The Byzantine emperor ruled only his capital of Constantinople. In the spring of 1453, the Ottoman Sultan Mehmet II laid siege to Constantinople. The city was defended by a mere 7,000 troops. Mehmet had an army of some 80,000 men. But Mehmet wasn't sure he would win. The city's massive walls had withstood sieges for 1,000 years. Protected by those walls, Constantinople's defenders held out for weeks. But Mehmet didn't just have an army. He had a mega weapon. A bronze cannon nearly 10 meters long, with a barrel nearly a meter in diameter and 20 centimeters thick. It's said it could hurl a 450-kilogram stone cannonball more than 1.5 kilometers. This behemoth and nearly 70 smaller cannon bombarded Constantinople's walls day and night, damaging them so badly that the Turks succeeded in taking the city. The fall of Constantinople was a devastating blow to Europe. Constantinople had been one of Christendom's oldest and holiest cities. Now it was the capital of a powerful Muslim empire, renamed Istanbul, from a Turkish word meaning "find Islam." From their new capital of Istanbul, the Ottomans now controlled access to the Black Sea and the Eastern Mediterranean. European merchants were cut off from the Silk Road. For nearly 100 years, Europeans had been growing wealthier and more eager to buy Asia's luxury goods. Europe needed to find new routes to the East. And within 50 years of Constantinople's fall, it would. At the Battle of Crécy and the Siege of Constantinople, an ancient Chinese invention, gunpowder, had helped transform medieval Europe. Now, another Chinese invention and European innovation would help transform the future.